Hello everyone, thank you for coming today. We have to apologize for the late start, and we can comfortably blame the weather. I won't spend a lot of time introducing Sarah Fischer other than saying that she's at Washington University. I'm sorry. American University. She's worked in Turkey at Bosphorus University, Boğaziçi University, and Koç University before, and her thesis is on specifically Headscarf.
Yes.
So she's going to talk to us today about the relationship between secularism, state secularism as she defines it, and the Headscarf ban, Headscarf issue in Turkish Universities. So I'll just simply turn the table over to her.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, and thank you all for braving the cold and the snow to come participate in this discussion. When I moved here, it's actually located in the tundra. I wish someone would have told me sooner. Before I begin, I'd also like to thank Kadir Ustun and Natalie Lopez for inviting me to speak today and inviting you to join in this discussion. My talk is entitled State Secularism and the Headscarf Divide at Turkish Universities. I started studying the Headscarf issue in 2007 and actually moved to Turkey for the first time right before the Headscarf protests in February of 2008, which were followed by the near closure of the Justice and Development Party. I spent about 8 months in Turkey that year, studying in both Istanbul and Ankara, then came back to DC for 8 months, and then returned to Turkey last year and spent the next 14 months there. So this research comes from information gathered and interviews recorded during the time that I was in Turkey. It is part of my dissertation, which is entitled Democracy, Modernization, and the Headscarf, Women's Relationships with Secularism in Contemporary Turkey. And if, after today's discussion, you would like to talk to me more about these issues or read part of my dissertation, please let me know. The headscarf and its relationship with secularism, kind of jumping right in. Scholars view secularism as a prerequisite to equal political rights for women, particularly in majority Muslim countries, as part of modernization. Ahmed Ghosh, a noted scholar, says that a call for secular democracy in Muslim states as a prerequisite to ensure equal rights for women, or some semblance of human rights for all men and women, is based on various reasons, most of them in contestation to an Islamic state. In Turkey, the headscarf issue has become the dividing issue between the secular and Islamist political factions, with secularists closely tied to the military, the Republican People's Party, and the established urban elite. On the other side is a party with Islamist roots, the AKP, which is composed primarily of small, more conservative business owners from Anatolia, which controls the parliament and the presidency. Despite declarations from the secular elite that wearing the headscarf is a threat to secularism, 63% of Turkish women wear some form of the headscarf. The Turkish version of secularism is a form of laicism adopted from the French model. The contemporary Turkish state was founded in 1923, and in the 1924 Turkish constitution formally repudiated Islam as the official religion of the state. Laiklik was formally introduced in 1928, and in 1937 it was written into the second article of the Turkish constitution. The establishment of the first Turkish constitution also brought with it issues of gender equality due to Turkey's desire to be modern, as modeled by the West, in this case, Europe. Turkey also adopted the Swiss Civil Code, the Italian Criminal Code, and the French schooling system. The Swiss Civil Code did not recognize political equality at the time between men and women, but 6 years later, in 1934, women were granted suffrage rights in Turkey. Although secularism was meant to make participation more equal, in practice it seems that powerful elites within a government frequently use secularism as a tool to discourage or disallow the participation of certain groups. Many scholars create different typologies of secularism. I'm not going to go into all those typologies right now, but I'm going to discuss one. Bhargava, who studies secularism in India, explains the distinction in secular states by creating two categories of secular states: amoral secular states and value-based secular states. Value-based secular states exhibit the following features. They're non-theocratic, they have the principle of non-establishment of religion, there's peace between communities or encouragement of peace between communities, toleration, religious liberty to any religious group, religious liberty granted non-preferentially to members of every religious group, the liberty to embrace a religion other than the one in which a person was born into, or to reject all religions, no discrimination by the state on grounds of religion to entitlements provided by the state, no discrimination in admission to educational institutions on the grounds of religion, and equality of active citizenship, meaning no discrimination on the grounds of religion and the right to vote, deliberate on public matters, and participate generally in the political realm. If one examines the features of these value-based secular states closely, one will see that the features go hand in hand with liberal democracy. They reinforce that religion is an individual choice and that an individual's religion, or lack thereof, should not prevent them from participating in state matters. Value-based secularism presumes that states provide individuals the opportunity to participate in politics. And furthermore, it presumes that the liberal democratic states provide access to education for its citizens, thus insinuating a fundamental equality for citizens in their right to an education. Toleration, another point, points to individuals being able to expect the state to protect their liberties, and to do so in a fairly equal manner. According to Bargova, the other form of secularism is an amoral secular state, because the sole purpose of an amoral secular state is to maximize power, wealth, or both. Such states may verbally ascribe to the values of peace, liberty, and equality, but their actions do not demonstrate progress towards these ideals. Amoral secular states are interested in the labor and production capabilities of their subjects and choose instrumentally whether or not to take a hands-off approach to religions or connect with them. Bargova comments that based on evidence from his analysis of India, that in both value-based and amoral secular states, secularism and religious choice must be combined with political freedoms to flourish. Otherwise, situations where one can question one's priest, imam, or pastor without being able to question one's political leaders will occur. But this is, of course, more likely to happen in amoral secular states, where power and wealth are the likely end goals. And this is exactly what we see happen in Turkey. Shortly after the founding of the country, the elite embraced secularism as a way to solidify their hold on power in Turkey. The elite had control of government, business, the judiciary, and the military. By controlling Islam through laicism, they brought religion under their purview as well, virtually eliminating any chance for a challenge to arise to their power. Particularly from the 1950s onwards, a select few families in Turkey controlled many business ventures, most of the wealth, and played a decisive role in politics. They used their political capital to win lucrative business deals from the government. This in turn increased their wealth and power, creating a vicious cycle. The elite were not concerned with expanding democracy or ensuring human rights, and coups occurred approximately every 10 years. So part of Turkey's struggle with secularism, and ultimately the source of its trouble with the headscarf, is the state of Turkish democracy. Turkish democracy is illiberal, according to many scholars, because although verbally the Turkish state endorses liberal democracy, its policies do not protect its citizens' bodies, possessions, and rights equally. Democratization in Turkey has not been an even process. Levels of democratization within Turkey vary along religious and cultural cleavages, as discussed in Bargova's discussion of amoral secularism. The role of education in state secularism is the next part of my speech, and I'm subtitled Lessons from the French Model. By adopting so many of its establishment documents from Europe, Turkey imported laws and structures without adapting them to Turkey's own cultural history and context in the 1920s and 1930s. French republicanism, nationalism, was built upon laïcité in the form of secularism that Turkey would later adopt, under which all identities, including religious identities, become secondary to national identities. Public education plays a critical role in the nationalist scheme, as it provides daily state-guided assimilation into the culture for migrants and immigrants. In Joan Scott's study of the veil and veiling politics in France, she outlines a trajectory that, in many ways, parallels the Turkish case. Her argument explains why it was teachers and professors who were targeted for the first headscarf bans, then students, and then women in other professions. Scott argues that laïcité became one of the guiding principles of the French Republic, and the French public education system has been and continues to be responsible for introducing the newcomers to the principles of France and assimilating them, as previously mentioned. As this last wave of immigrants, the latest wave of immigrants, Muslims, came to France, the school system was expected to assimilate them too. But society forgot that frequently assimilation takes several generations. The modern day French expected Muslims to assimilate overnight. The French blamed their school system for not assimilating immigrants faster. In trying to assimilate immigrants faster and reinforce republicanism, symbols that were seen by the French elite to be in opposition to the French Republican identity, like the headscarf that was assumed to represent a religious identity, were banned or their use restricted. Unlike the French, the Turks had little idea of Turkishness at the time they imported YSOT. So the elite created an image of the ideal modern Turk in opposition to Ottomanism and aligned with the West's idea of modernity. Any potential identity that threatened that of being Turkish, like religion, gender, or ethnicity or race, became antithetical to this nationalistic identity. Public education modeled the secular lifestyle and the correct version of history, quote-unquote correct version, proper mannerisms, proper dress, and proper language. Modern Turks were supposed to rescind their religious and ethnic identities in public, dress like Europeans, speak proper Turkish, and socialize with the other sex. If they did not want to do these things, the alternative option was to stay in more rural communities because the state's attention was focused on making its cities and the people in them appear to be modern. Although these reforms were fairly easy to institute within the western cities of Turkey, such as Izmir, Istanbul, and Ankara, the reforms were not as closely monitored in rural areas. Furthermore, in rural areas, the headscarf was more a part of tradition than religion. Women who worked in the fields wore it to keep their hair clean and also used it to communicate emotions at times. But beginning in the 1950s, Turkey experienced a huge internal migration, with rural families, including scarred women, migrating to cities, making the headscarf more noticeable to the urban political elite. These families came looking for work and usually lived on the outskirts of cities in fairly homogeneous communities, arranged according to the area that they migrated from. Men worked as manual laborers, where women tended the house, and the children took advantage of the free public school. At the time, the state viewed the headscarf as a symbol of the poor, uneducated women who were not fulfilling their role under the Turkish modernization plan, but not as a threat to secularism. Similarly to the situation in France, urban schools and universities in Turkey were expected to assimilate these children of the families who had migrated from rural areas to find work in the cities. When women from these families continued to wear the headscarves after obtaining high school diplomas and university degrees, schools had failed to produce citizens that fit the nationalist model. And if scarred women continued to serve as role models by being teachers and professors, their young students would want to wear the headscarf as well. So the state banned professors and teachers from wearing the veil, hoping that this ban would bolster nationalist principles. The headscarf's increasing prominence, particularly on the heads of female educators, made the Turkish political elite even more nervous, or had made it even more nervous, especially after they had just seen women neighboring Iran begin to wear the headscarf as a sign of support for the revolution in the early 1980s when the first headscarf bans occurred. The Turkish secular elite became concerned that the headscarf was a sign of an otherwise concealed desire held by many Turks to establish an Islamic state in Turkey. Teachers and professors were supposed to be on the cutting edge of Turkish modernism, which still modeled itself on Western European norms, and they were supposed to be instilling nationalistic values, including secularism, into these children in the classroom. The image that the Turkish teachers and professors were supposed to be projecting was not supposed to look towards Anatolia, Islam, or pre-Republican Turkey. And according to Turkish secularists, the headscarf represented all of these things. Thus, headscarf women have found themselves at the center of a debate that secularists claim would define the future of modern Turkey. Although scarred, by going to university, these women had in many ways internalized the values of the Turkish Republic to the extent that their mothers had not. Thus, although these women may not have been internalizing the national principles of the Turkish Republic exactly as the Republic's secular elite would have liked, or as fast as the Republic's secular elite would have liked, they and their families were slowly adapting. But the Turkish Republic and its secularist leaders portrayed these women as a threat, and one whose influence could spread dramatically if women were allowed to remain in positions where they were role models within the Turkish education system and Turkish society generally. If scarf women were allowed to remain in the Turkish educational system, secularists argued, their power would grow and secularism in Turkey would end. If Turks wanted to preserve secularism and the other ideals of the Republic that school children pledged their allegiance to every morning, then women could not wear the headscarf in schools. So Turkey instituted increasingly targeted measures to ban scarf women from positions of authority in education. Claiming to act in defense of secularism, the state's higher education board forbade professors from wearing the headscarf in the early 1980s. Later, the ban was extended to all teachers and all students, and now reports state that scarf women are being denied entry to some courts and some hospitals. Many savvy and well-educated headscarf-wearing women were affected by this ban. One woman explained her situation like this: I'm well-educated, I have a bachelor's degree from Istanbul University in law, and I'm a defense away from my master's degree in law. The headscarf ban was put into effect shortly before I was to defend my thesis. It was the last thing I had to do to earn my degree. On the day of my defense, I stood at home wondering what I should do. My mother, who was covered, begged me to go to school and take off my headscarf for just a couple of hours so that I could defend my thesis and earn my degree. I went to school, but when I tried to remove my headscarf, I vomited. I could not remove my headscarf, so I could not enter the room to defend my thesis. I have my legal practice, but I want children. I see my nieces and I want a family of my own, but who will marry me? Turkish men who would marry a lawyer will not marry one who wears a headscarf, and men who want a wife who wears a headscarf do not want a wife who is a lawyer and who runs a women's organization. There are times I get so depressed. End of quote. As wearers of a symbol of Islam, headscarf women are assumed to support an Islamic theocracy in Turkey. Frequently, however, headscarf women told me that an Islamist regime was not what they wanted. For example, one young woman said, "The secular government assumes that I don't want a secular Turkey because I wear a headscarf. This is not true. I support secularism, but I want rights. I want my rights. I want to go to school while wearing my headscarf, because what we have now is not democracy." In conclusion, the issue of the headscarf in Turkey shows us that state secularism, by limiting women's access to education and thus jobs, in order to protect the sacred spaces of nationalism, actually hinders women's development and the development of democracy. Furthermore, even if women wear the headscarf, the secular elements of the Turkish state should not assume that this is a sign of the coming Islamist state. Thank you.
Great, thank you for sticking to the time. I can open the floor for questions. Yes.
Okay,
Sure.
let me try one that came up at your conference a couple of weeks ago, which I thought was interesting. In Turkey, the focus is on dresses, on women's dress. Somebody pointed out the law is for both sexes, but you don't see men bringing back the fez or anything like that. It's just the headscarf. And I thought about that, and yes, in Afghanistan under the Taliban, it's not just the burqa, but if you're a barber, you better be very careful. It's men's hair to men's clothing as well. And I made me wonder, okay, so why the distinction? Why in Turkey is it so focused? Really, it's as far as I can tell, pretty much on the female clothing as opposed to male dress. Or am I incorrect on that?
Well,
Contrast.
I don't know, but I think at the beginning, when the republic was formed, there were restrictions on men's clothing because the men were not allowed to wear heads.
That's what I mean. But you don't see the reaction. How can I go back to that on the male side, even by people you would consider?
In 1926, the hat law came into effect, and that was actually the law that a lot of people point to as banning the headscarf. It didn't actually ban the headscarf. It banned the male fez.
Yeah.
But since that time, men's dress, these headscarf women frequently point out how unfair it is that they can't enter universities or other government buildings with their headscarves on, but men who wear beards, which is considered to be, by some, to be an equivalent symbol, can. I think this has a lot to do with the idea that in Turkish society, women are seen as birthing the state and are responsible for the reproduction of the state, and that therefore their bodies are focused on more than men's, including their clothing. It also has to do a lot with these binaries that you set up as public, private, to typically women's bodies have been private, and as they move into the public, the state takes more and more opportunities to regulate them because it's not sure exactly how to handle it because women were in the private realm for so years, whereas men's bodies have already been in the private realm for so long. Does that answer your question?
I'm not sure. But you get the contrast, I mean, with Afghanistan, but yet, as I say, it's, you know, you see, even in Iran, I mean, you mentioned beards and so on, the haircuts are an issue.
I can just cite a little anecdote. In 1998, I was at Istanbul University when they did implement that ban, and so many women were waiting outside the university at the doors. The following day, for a day or two, they actually tried to implement the beard ban, but it wasn't feasible because I remember the doorman trying to sort of distinguish. It's like, do you have a lot of beard or not? A lot of people came to school with, you know,
different type of
sort of beard.
Symbolize different things.
So there is a faction or there is a small group who will actually, even today, they will defend that hat law should be implemented in the way it was prescribed in the early republic, because we are supposed to follow the Republican ideals and principles. So it is still not a resolved issue. Of course, it's when you compare it to women's clothing and the focus on the women, I wanted, it's much more significant. But I wanted to actually ask you that when you talked about secularism in the early republic, you said that it was sort of for the elites. It was a way of constructing the national identity. So national identity's construction came first, rather than other ideals. So women's emancipation in that way was actually supposed to serve the construction of national identity. Would you elaborate maybe? Do you agree with that?
I would agree that women's liberation was closely related to those ideals of modernism and the modern Turkish Republic. When Ataturk was establishing modern Turkey, he was really looking towards Europe and looking at the trends that were going on there. And it was clear that not only was secularism and a trend, but also in the most modern countries of the time, that women had equal rights with men, and that those two have gone hand in hand with each other in Turkey for almost a century now. And that I think for a lot of, when I talk to secularists in Turkey, a lot of them say, when someone from Europe comes and sees headscarf women walking on the streets, it's a sign of almost backwardsness to them, or the seculars perceive it as a sign of backwardsness to the Europeans. So really the modernity and the modern aspects of Turkish life are being discussed through women's bodies and the headscarf. And the headscarf women, will say, but as modern individuals, we have the rights to do this. We have the right to express ourselves through what we wear and our bodies. But there's clearly a very large tension between these two elements.
Yes.
Pardon me if I'm a little undereducated on this subject. It's something I've just started reading about, and it branches out from the central point of discussion. But I've been reading a lot about the Gulen movement recently. I understand it to be it is a religious-based movement, but at the same time, it teaches secularism. What are their feelings on headscarves and the role it plays in Turkish social? You get my point.
I do. And actually, can you introduce yourself?
Oh, my name's Derek Fox.
Okay.
Institute of Turkish Studies.
Okay. It's nice to meet you. It's nice to meet all of you. I'm not a scholar of the Gulen movement, and there are people that study just the Gulen movement. But from talking to a few people who are part of the Gulen movement, and I don't claim that the entire movement feels this way, the Gulen movement, those people have said that they believe that the law is wrong, the law banning or not permitting women to access universities while they're wearing the headscarf, but that their teachings encourage the removal of the headscarf in order to access education, because education is seen as so important, and that thus a lot of the women who are members of that movement do go to universities, do remove their headscarves, and then recover after they depart the university campuses.
I see. But the Gulen movement has its own universities and schools. Is the headscarf ban enforced in these institutions?
Well, private universities in Turkey don't really exist. There are some quasi-private universities. But to say I think that the Gulen movement has private universities, at least in Turkey, is probably overstepping it, at least in my opinion. I don't know that much about the Gulen movement outside of Turkey, so if you can point to a more specific example, I might be able to answer the question, but probably not.
That's all right. I mean, I was just referring to the schools in general, not just the, I mean, the universities are obviously a larger, more of our focus here, but in general, I know there is sometimes a difference in, should I say, in grades, in grade schools, different things that are expected.
I've heard that myself, but I've not visited the Gulen schools, so, and again, I'm not an expert in them, so.
I don't want to, I'm not asking you to overstep your bounds, so.
Sorry.
Actually, many quasi-private universities that Sarah mentioned, they allowed for a while at certain points to sort of allow people in, but there is a higher education council in Turkey that governs, oversees all of the universities, and they have to abide by their rules, even if they're sort of publicly funded or privately funded. So they have to sort of follow, and that's kind of the struggle too.
Yeah, you have some more, I would say, more conservatively religious universities, but when they have to follow the guidelines of YOK, the Higher Education Council, and even the professors at those universities, the Turkish equivalent of tenure is decided by those boards, and like moving up levels for university professors is decided by the Higher Education Commission. So there's a really limited amount of power these universities have. It's also why you don't see, in the case of French education, there are a lot of Muslim girls that are going to Catholic schools, because those Catholic schools, you can wear religious symbols, you have more religious freedom there. But in the case of Turkish education, if you want to wear religious symbols, you can't go to a private school because they're still under the purview of the State Board of Higher Education.
Great, my question. I hope we didn't divulge too much from the topic. Thank you.
Hi, Nur Erbay, Sabah newspaper from Turkey. And I would like to ask, do you have any findings or recent studies on how society looks to the ban? Like some concrete numbers?
I haven't read anything lately that talks about concrete numbers in opposition to the ban. How recent are you looking for?
Like last 2 years, maybe last 5 years, because Turkey's, as all we know, like transforming in democracy, and from the wide range of people from Turkey, from different fractions. I think, as I observe, they're coming to conclusion that this is not a thing that the democratic countries should remain like that. So
I think the last public opinion polls that I've seen were from 2008. So I haven't seen anything new come out in 2009 or 2010 yet. But I would expect with the recent developments this fall there to be more polls coming out soon.
Yes.
I think it was about a month ago, there was a sort of a new debate starting, and the president's wife was involved in the headscarf issue in elementary schools and who decides and all that. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what does this imply for this general topic? What's the implication of that debate?
Well, the debate,
which direction is it going?
The debate was multifaceted. There was, at one point, a young girl in elementary school who had gone to school with the headscarf on, and that occurred shortly after the government discussed lifting the ban again. So the government trying to lift the ban, this young girl walks into school, and then a debate erupted about whether or not, if the ban was lifted at the university level, would it stay in place at the high school and elementary school level. That came in conjunction with this issue of Mrs. Gul, who has typically not appeared at state functions because of the headscarf ban. And so they have, the Turkish president has typically had two functions, like when he greets visiting dignitaries. One that's an official cocktail hour, and another one later that his wife does not attend and headscarf women do not attend, and one that has usually started later in the day, sometimes only an hour or so later, that that has been more casual, not an official event per se, and is thus open to headscarf women, including his wife. So this kind of controversy all happened at once, and then it ended by Erdogan saying that for him, the headscarf controversy is over, it's done, and that some universities, including Istanbul University, were being directed by the Higher Education Council to remove their ban and let headscarf women in. I haven't seen that that has actually been extended to all universities in Turkey, even though the Higher Education Commission did say that they were taking steps in order to push it to all universities in Turkey if they needed to. I don't think that it signals the end of the headscarf ban and headscarf-related politics in Turkey. I think that a lot of people would like it to, but I think that the issue has been I think that there's been so much fighting over this issue for so long that especially the secular elements of Turkey take it as a sign of this kind of encroaching Islamism, and the government not listening to the founding principles of Kemalism and exerting its power, overexerting its power. But that's my opinion on where it's going.
But what does this debate means for the sort of headscarf in high schools and elementary schools? That was my question. Was that the implication, or why was this debate started?
You mean, will the ban be lifted for elementary schools and high schools? I don't think so. And the government seemed to be very anti-lifting it at the elementary and secondary school level at the time. So I don't see the ban being lifted at that level.
Can we make a clarification? Is there an official written ban for the universities that says you cannot enter the university, your head covered? Because we've heard, as far as I know, there's no actually specific ban on the headscarf, but there are dress codes that are interpreted in that manner.
Yes, as far as I know, that is the same, or I know the same. It's an interpretation of a code that states that students must be in compliance to principles that I think modern clothing that are in line with Ataturk's principles. And many have questioned why, if the ruling, or if that is interpreted to say that headscarves aren't permissible, then why are, mini skirts permissible? Is that modern, appropriate work dress or work attire? I've also heard a question: why are bikinis, or why aren't bikinis banned?
There are some discussions. I listened to some discussions on Turkish TV. People sitting around and discussing why it shouldn't, why you cannot allow girls under 18 to enter, schools with headscarf. So they don't necessarily, even the headscarf supporters, I guess, they don't find it as feasible to sort of push the public education system below 18 years old to
if it in the end at universities is lifted completely, perhaps the headscarf supporters would push for it, but I think at this point their political backing is so fragile that they don't have enough clout to push for it. Secondary and elementary school levels.
it might actually require a whole new restructuring of the education system.
Yes.
If you're not allowing the Imam Hatip schools, right? So the private system doesn't allow private schools right now. So if you have a restructuring of that, then it might be possible that, you have Christian schools where you can wear your... It's the same thing for... Well, it's not the same thing because they're minority schools, right?
They're minority. But, I mean, if you're talking about in France or Turkey, it's the same thing as...
I mean, like Christians going to, let's say, Catholic schools in Turkey, they can wear a religious dress.
No, actually, like it's technically banned at all schools, like
even for religious minorities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know if it's enforced or not, and it clearly hasn't been as big of a public issue, but